Chapter 2. Zelda tolerated Link for the rest of the month after thoroughly embarrassing herself every step of the way. There was nowhere that she'd succeeded, nowhere that she'd won. She'd done everything wrong and lost all her battles with Link while she'd attempted to barter for more practical training to do. All it had done was encourage Link to tell her to run, not jog. Because she was still running and working on her stupid arm strength after a month of practically being confined to the palace. And she was ready to scream.
How is it going?
King Rome had appeared, walking into the training yard to watch one day. Link fell to his knee and bowed his head. Zelda glared at the knight. He never did that when she came in. Possibly because she'd yelled at him one day early on to stop bowing every 4 seconds. But still.
Horrible. I've done my time. Let this be over.
But Rome just sighed and turned his head.
Link?
Scoffing, Zelda gestured to herself as she was being blatantly ignored.
Father?
She's doing well, Your Majesty. Princess Zelda has made incredible strides.
Zelda scoffed.
Liar. He won't even let me touch a sword.
She's not quite ready for that yet, sire.
It's been a month. I am.
Link looked right at her, but he didn't respond. She knew what that meant by now. She wouldn't like his answer. Rome nodded as he glanced between them.
Very well. Whatever Sir Link deems appropriate progress in this regard is good enough for me. But I am actually not just here for a progress report. Celeste has fallen ill, and the Temple of Time is in dire need of a priestess to lead them in prayer today. It's Hylia's feast day, in case you forgot.
Zelda's eyes widened. She had forgotten. She'd lost all track of time around her.
What would you like me to do?
Lead them in a session. It's nothing you don't know how to perform. I want Link to go with you as your guard, but I think, given that there are already many soldiers and guards there for the event, he alone will be sufficient accompaniment. I'd like you to leave right away.
All too eager to get away from Link's training, she raced for her room and washed before changing into her white priestess garb, adorning herself with the revered jewels of the goddess. She hesitated to take her golden circlet, but opted against it. She wasn't representing herself as the princess today, but as a servant of the goddess. Never, in all her years, did Zelda think she'd be this eager to pray. The rush to the stables wasn't fast enough. She needed to get out of the restricting walls of the castle, away from that damned training yard, and away from Link. Riding out into Hyrule Field was so freeing. It was the breath of fresh air that she'd been denied for nearly a month into her safety house arrest. Though there were researchers at the castle that allowed her to satiate her unquenchable thirst for knowledge, and she still had her books, she hadn't been out in the field for longer than she realized. The grass blurring beneath her as she rode was dizzying in the best way possible, and she relished the unfamiliar sensation of her bouncing brain. She was out of practice, rocking on the horse far too aggressively, but she didn't care. This was her freedom, and she was going to take it while she could. This was what the Yiga had done to her. Locked her in a physical imprisonment just as much as the goddess had locked her in a mental one. The ride to the Temple of Time was relatively short, far shorter than she wanted anyway. She wanted to bask in the fresh air that caressed her face, and the sun that warmed her. She wanted the shade of the trees to allow her to close her eyes. She wanted all the freedom she'd been denied for the sake of her safety. When they arrived at the temple, Link veered off to speak to the other guards while she went to the goddess statue to prepare everything for the offerings. They were simple. The goddess didn't require much, but they gave her what they could. The crown provided most of the food, but villagers brought flowers that they thought were beautiful, and small innocent animals that would inevitably hop away. No texts had ever said the goddess required a sacrifice, but Zelda ruefully stared at the nearest rabbit and wondered if that was why the goddess didn't bless her. She'd never truly sacrificed more than her time and energy. But now wasn't the moment for that. She wore a perfect mask of polished perfection. Her eyes were soft. She was soft. When people started arriving, Zelda greeted them, most with shock written all over their features that the princess was just casually here to lead them through the devotions of the goddess. Many grabbed her hands, dropping to their knees as if she were the goddess herself. Zelda had to shoo her guards off of her several times, especially when the desperate or the hungry clung to her so tight she knew she'd bruise. They begged for her intercession. But Zelda didn't have permission to speak for her father, so all she could do was say that she'd talk to him and to pray for the goddess's hand to guide his decision. When the ceremony itself began, most of it was spent in silent contemplation. Zelda knelt in front of the goddess, thanking the deity for her favor and blessings during one of the lengthier spans of silent prostration and devotion. But as Zelda sat there reciting the traditional ones like thanks for health, protection, family, and all the things that one is meant to thank the goddess for, she realized that she'd been blessed with nothing that she'd needed beyond that which almost everyone had. Sure, the calamity hadn't hit yet, and for the extra time, Zelda was immensely thankful. The time alone did nothing when Zelda was little more than fumbling around in a dark room that stretched on forever, straining to find one object without guidance. Her powers were hidden, and she still had no clue how to access them. If she couldn't, all the extra time in the world wouldn't help them. So here Zelda was, begging a goddess for everything, and then thanking her when she was graced with silence. Because that's what good priestesses do when they pray. They don't resort to begging as she'd done in the past. They don't curse the goddess for their apathy. They offer sacrifices, food, blessings, and devotion. Unquestioning, unyielding devotion. Zelda looked up from where she knelt, staring into the dead eyes of the marble statue of Hylia. Her smile was etched in, but the very fact that it was even grinning made Zelda feel like it was mocking her. From where Zelda was in the very front of the temple, her gaze was unseen by everyone. She scowled at the taunting goddess Hylia, who smiled and accepted her praise without reciprocating, while hot, bitter tears leaked down Zelda's face. Despite everything Zelda was, despite her bloodline, her hidden powers, her special place in Hyrule, her role in her family, her blessings and her curses, she hated the goddess. Nearly chuckling at the sheer relief of the admission in her own mind, she stopped herself just as the weight of her blasphemous thoughts settled over her, weighing her down with a guilt that had her hands braced against the floor and her head bowed once again. That's why the goddess sends Yiga to kill her. It's why the goddess denies her her birthright. Because Zelda is not only a failure, but she's also just as bad as the Yiga, and she shouldn't be leading a prayer in the sacred temple. Her chest hurt, and she pressed her hand against her heart, as if it could slow the rapid beating down. She looked to the goddess again once more before she decided it was a good time to end. But before she could push herself up, she locked eyes with one other. Link was behind a pillar, watching her and the rest of the temple, well out of her way, but close enough to rush to her side if there were an emergency. And the pitying look he gave her told her that he'd seen far too much of her private moment. She wanted to be angry, but she just didn't have it in her to be angry with him in that moment. He was doing his job, and so was she. She went to take a shaky breath, but it nearly whined when she did, and her palm flew to her eye. She was familiar with that sound. Her hand came back wet, and Zelda hastily brushed her cheeks off. A few tears shed by a priestess for the goddess was okay, but a stream down her cheeks was a sign of something deeper. Finally standing, she spun to face the congregation, regal and graceful in every move she made. She knew how to put it all aside. Raising her arms, she said a final prayer, closing her eyes to stop tears of painfully informed insincerity from spilling again. Only now, her neck burned with the knowledge that she had an audience, and she wasn't going to let the tears fall again. When the session concluded, Zelda sighed as she made her way to the doors to personally say farewell to everyone who approached her. Her dress flowed like she was a lily pad floating down a river, almost like the goddess herself were moving the fabric the way it would move in a spring, despite the lack of water while she made her way to the entryway. The light hit her through the window, casting a yellow glow around her that had her squinting into it until her eyes adjusted. Again, she felt Link and the other guards all move closer while some parishioners thanked her for her time, asked for royal favors, or ignored her altogether. She was used to it all by now, but still, the long-winded interactions with everyone had her more exhausted than she'd be if she'd trained with Link. By the time the temple was empty, Zelda dragged her feet along the dirt outside until she hit the smooth shuffle of the grass. Groaning at the sunlight, she realized that leaving the temple had taken nearly an hour because she refused to let the guards scatter the people who asked to speak with her. And while she was bone-tired and weary, she did what her father had always said when she started joining him through boring meetings, to look at it from their perspective. They see hundreds of their subjects in a row every time there's court, but for most subjects, it's the one time in their life they'll ever speak to the king and princess of Hyrule, and they're due that respect. She practically sagged as she headed to the small pond nearby so she could splash her clammy skin with cool water. In the distance, she could see her guards heading down the hill to scout and line the route home. The water was cool in Zelda's hands, and even better against her face. There was some level of lightheadedness that always came from devotions to the goddess. Lying and kneeling and standing and bowing and kneeling. It was disorienting at times. But she was already running on fumes, and she wanted nothing more than to just slip into the water and let it carry her the rest of the way home, keeping her enveloped in its comfortingly cool embrace. Glancing at the road again, Zelda felt bad to keep her guards waiting, but with a selfish need, she kicked her sandals off instead and sat down, pulling her dress up to her knees so she could let her feet dangle in the water. She sighed in perfect contentment, her eyes practically rolling back into her head. Closing her eyes felt so good. The relief and the comforting heaviness of closed eyes, the warmth of the sun on her face contrasting with the cool water lapping at her legs. She could stay here for hours like this, in this perfect moment of peace and freedom. Eons passed, maybe centuries. Zelda didn't know or care. It was the longest moment she'd had to herself in breathable air in years. And then the moment ended, as all moments do.
Princess?
She wondered how long he'd been there, but made no move to look at him. Without her acknowledgement, he continued.
Are you okay?
She let out a long sigh, the goddess's stone eyes still etched in her memory. Her father looking straight through her to Link. Link's indifference while they trained.
As if you care.
I do.
She didn't know why or what it was. Perhaps it was his calm, almost sincere tone, or maybe it was the quiet confidence in his voice, but it irked her beyond belief, and she spun around, sinking into a small patch of mud so she could stand and face him.
You do not? You treat me like an imbecile and make me run all day as if I'm training to sprint across Hyrule in some stupid foot race. You show off your skill through your inaction, which just demonstrates my failure even further. You're a rude, impolite, stuck-up, bossy, condescending, disrespectful, arrogant, selfish, wretched young knight, and I hate you!
Unable to take a deep breath, half of it came out as a sob. Her voice cracked, and she knew she'd failed once again because her cheeks changed temperature as a line spilled down them.
I hate you.
She covered her mouth to stop a sob, but she was already halfway past Link to head back to the Temple of Time to beg for Hylia's forgiveness, because Zelda knew that Link wasn't the only one she was yelling at. Stained impressions of Zelda's footprint marred the floor of the temple when she rushed inside, having forgotten her shoes by the water. Link's footsteps were quick behind her.
Princess, please.
I don't need you to care. I don't want you to care, Link.
I still do.
Zelda's face was pinched up, recalling the pitying look he'd given her before. If she turned to face him, she knew he'd be doing it again now, and she didn't want his pity.
Princess.
Link took a cautious step toward her that echoed in the empty temple.
I don't know what impression I've given you, but you're not failing. Not by a long shot. You're more determined than half the troops I train. There are days when I need to drag them out of the barracks, but you're there every day, even while thinking so poorly of your own progress. You don't see that you're succeeding, but you are. This isn't an overnight thing. You can't just become proficient. You don't just wake up one day ready to take on the world. You train towards it.
She shook her head.
You're just trying to make me believe I'm better than I am because I'm the princess, and princesses need to be coddled. I know that trick. It's politics 101.
Have I ever coddled you?
Zelda finally turned around and met his eyes, fighting a sardonic smirk from crossing her face before scoffing. The man had her doing exercises that had her damn near throwing up. He had her running before she'd even opened her eyes. She was working on arm strength before breakfast.
No.
No, I don't. Because you're strong enough to take it. You don't need coddling. In time, you'll get where you want to be.
You don't need to be so rude while we're there. Barking out orders like I'm some kind of...
A guilty expression appeared on Link's face.
Soldier?
Yes!
Zelda laughed, wiping away the trails of tears from earlier before they could dry and stiffen.
I'm not a soldier.
No, you're not. I may have taken my orders to treat you as such too literally. I'll do well to remember that tomorrow.
He bowed to her and spun on his heels, leaving her alone with the goddess. She could hear him behind her, fumbling with a few things in the distance before it was quiet again, and she closed her eyes, lost in a humbled apology. After a time, there was a soft thud, and Zelda opened her eyes to see Link set a bucket and cloth down on her left. Then, he bent, meeting her confused eyes, and dropped her sandals beside her, smiling politely before backing away with a bow. She saw the footprint trail she'd left was gone, and a mop was against the wall. Her feet were still muddy though, and it was beginning to harden uncomfortably. In the bucket was water, and the cloth hung out. Turning quickly, she called out Link's name.
Link.
He stopped and waited.
I don't like you. But I don't hate you, Link. I didn't mean that. Hate is strong. Too strong a word in this case. Thank you for this.
He watched her for a moment before nodding once, bowing, and then returning to his place by the door to keep an eye out while giving her privacy. Zelda tied her hair up before heading down to the training yard again 2 days later. She would never admit it to Link, but she was feeling stronger, and she lasted longer during workouts and runs. She'd even begun doing extra training in her room at night, and then slept off the burn of it all after a bath. Link, Zelda realized, might just be about as stubborn as her if he hadn't quit yet after all her outbursts. She slowed down to let her guards take their place by the gateway of the training yard, and strode up to Link. He stood in the center of the yard, as always, swinging a sword around in his hand aimlessly as he waited for her. She'd add that trick to her list of things she wanted to eventually accomplish because, admittedly, it did look both cool and fun, like twirling a baton. Turning at the sound of her approach, though, he set the sword down and smiled at her, as he always did. And as usual, she didn't smile back, determined to maintain some of her status as a conscientious objector. Instead, she went right for the track. He always had her start off running anyway, so she needed no prompting from him. What surprised her, however, was when he started to jog beside her for the first time in the month that she'd been training.
What are you doing?
What's it look like? I'm running.
Her mouth dropped, and she slowed. Did he just joke with her?
I mean, why are you running with me?
Why not?
She rolled her eyes and did her best to ignore him, keeping her attention on warming up her legs before transitioning into a run. But by the third lap, with him keeping pace beside her rather than getting ahead or behind, she slowed down to a halt, and so did he.
Why are you still running with me?
Her hands were on her knees as she tried to slow the harsh heaving of her chest. She wasn't usually this out of breath anymore, but seeing him beside her had thrown her entirely. This was not how their days usually went. Link pushed a loose strand of hair out of his face before completely pulling his ponytail out altogether so he could retie it.
You're right. That's enough running today. Come on.
Zelda was embarrassed to see how little he was sweating compared to her. She could see a fine sheen on his forehead, while hers felt like a damned waterfall. Without him as a comparison, she'd felt more confident, but now, with him beside her, she was once again self-conscious at his athletic superiority. Not that she didn't already know that the man whose literal job it was to stay in shape so he could throw himself in front of a swinging sword would trump her fitness level, but she didn't need the overt reminder. She brushed past him to the training sword that always came next and held it straight out with one hand. Her posture was perfect, and she knew she could go a decent while before her arm would start to wobble, especially compared to when she first began. But Link shook his head and picked up his own weapon. She dropped her arm and watched him. For a moment, her heart lifted because he was finally going to let her fight and get this over with, but he simply led her to the wall of the training yard and gestured for her to lean against it. She did, suspicious of him changing up her routine. His eyes were mischievously pinned to hers before he nodded at her.
You're going to squat against the wall. Bend your knees and use the wall for support and hold it there.
He demonstrated, trying to hold back an amused smirk at Zelda's displeasure. She wanted to smack it off his face. He was usually better at hiding his emotions, especially if it was something he knew she'd dislike. But she copied his stance anyway, only to immediately straighten back out.
This burns already. How long do I have to stay like this?
In training, we remain in that position until either the commander tells us to stop or we collapse. Since you're not a soldier, I'd say ideally as long as you can. Then a short rest, and then again.
This is torture.
I could have you run suicide drills. Those are fun.
I beg your pardon? What did you just say?
They're a certain kind of sprint. They're high-endurance drills.
That is a horrible name for them.
That's what they're called.
They should be called something else.
If they have another name, Princess, I am not aware of it.
Zelda weighed her options. With one as terrible a name as that, she opted to lean back against the wall once more. At least squat sounded more amusing in her mind and could entertain her for a brief second. Prepared for the inevitable ache, Zelda bent her knees and tried to keep breathing through a legitimate pain as her legs began to shake fairly quickly. Her hands braced back against the wall, though it did very little but offer her some mental comfort. With her eyes closed, she tried to pretend she was anywhere but here. She pictured a Yiga standing above her. She was on the bridge again. Broken planks kept her from standing up straight, and her wide stance spread out her weight so the ones she used wouldn't break. If that situation happened, She could see why she was doing this. And if she straightened out, the Yiga's blade would meet her neck, and she would meet her doom.
You need to breathe. Stop and breathe.
His voice was right beside her, and her eyes flung open. He was beside her, like he'd maybe been doing the exercise with her, as he had with running, before he'd stopped to comment. Speaking in a slightly stern voice, he moved to stand in front of her.
Breathe.
Determined not to quit, not to stand straight and call this another failure, Zelda couldn't make her lungs work at the same time that every ounce of focus was going into keeping her in this horrid position. But she wanted to prove that she could do it. She felt something push against her stomach, and her legs gave out at the same moment air came rushing back into her lungs. Strong arms held her up as she panted for breath, her buckled knees struggling to loosen. But she didn't want strong arms, so she shoved him away and shook her leg out using the wall for balance.
Did you just punch me?
She'd wanted to put more venom into it, but her lungs were still too busy thanking her for the air.
Punch. I tapped you to startle you into breathing. It worked.
You make everything so effortless. You're mocking me by doing these at the same time, aren't you?
I am not mocking you, Princess. I am trying to support you. I have tried 2 different approaches now. Would you like me to try another? Because I don't know what you want from me at this point.
I want to fight. That's what I was sent here to do. So now I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it well so no Yiga can kill me in my sleep.
She threw herself onto the ground, leaning against the wall as she rested her legs. Link followed her down, sitting beside her as she grabbed at the collar of her shirt, needing something.
Do you know what it's like to live in constant fear? Or to constantly rely on someone else to keep me alive? I'm not saying you're not well and good to have in a pinch night. But if I want to stroll down my corridor, I need to take you with me because I could be killed for simply leaving my room. Forgive me if that frustrates me to no end. I want to control my own life. And even now, you're the only one who can give that to me.
And I can understand your frustration. Goddess, I don't know how you do it. You put up with far more than I ever would be able to. But you're just not there yet, Princess. I can't put a weapon in your hand right now and think that you'd be even remotely safe in an attack.
Not even a little? Am I that bad? Are you keeping something from me? Because that's just so hopeless.
Link looked out at the training yard.
Have you seen the Yiga fight? Really fight, I mean. When they ambush you, they kill your soldiers quickly. Soldiers who have been training far longer than I have been alive sometimes. The Yiga are deadly to the best of us.
He leaned forward, watching her carefully before continuing.
This is not an exercise to make you uncomfortable. Honestly, this isn't even to prepare you for the calamity. This is to get you ready for the rest of your life, so that one day you can go to the library and sit there for hours without an escort because you can defend yourself. This is your life, Princess. You're a public figure with enemies who are so much more powerful than any politician you've been taught to duel with. Hooked blades and twisted Sheikah magic are a tough match for your trained knights. I can't give you a weapon until you're ready. You need to be prepared. And besides, you'll have your magic when the time comes for the calamity anyway.
I won't.
She huffed as she cradled her head in her hands.
I am a failure, Link. It's been years and I haven't been able to do it.
On his knees before he could stop himself, Link pulled Zelda's hands away.
You're not. Get that out of your head. It's holding you back.
You're too perfect to understand what this is like. This has been my life since before I can remember. Failure is synonymous with me as Princess Zelda of Hyrule. Surely you've heard it in taverns. I can't go there, and even I've heard what people whisper about me. You're just too perfect to understand, aren't you?
I am far from it. I work all day, every day, to be good at what I do. When I'm not guarding you, I'm here training. What I'm not doing either is because I've been away on a mission. I didn't wake up one morning magically good at this. I traded a life for this position. I don't have friends who aren't knights. I don't socialize casually. I can hardly remember being a young teen or a child. I haven't seen my family in years, and I'm not complaining because, trust me, I'd do it all the same if I could go back. But it takes time. It took me years. The Yiga will kill you, Princess. I don't want that. No one does, except them. Don't give up on yourself.
He stood up and offered her his hand. She stared at it for a moment before taking it and hoisting herself to her feet before glaring at the wall, keeping her eyes off him.
I'm sorry. This exercise is just difficult, and I'm frustrated.
She leaned back against the wall and waited for Link to signal for her to start again. With a small grin, Link shrugged.
And here I am, giving you the easier version of what we do.
There's a harder one?
Link nodded and held his hand out.
Your sword, please.
She handed him her discarded training weapon, and he joined her against the wall, squatting low and holding both his arms out, a sword in each hand. Zelda's eyes widened in horror, because goddess forbid she ever had to do that. She mimicked him with her legs, though her arms stayed mercifully against the stone. She watched Link, going from horror to amazement as she already felt the burn in her leg muscles.
Oh, that's terrible.
He turned and winked.
This still isn't even what we do. Try doing this with armor on.
To the dismay of both of them, Zelda chuckled before clearing her throat to pretend she hadn't. But she closed her eyes and returned her focus to her legs. And the second she could no longer breathe steadily, she stood up straight to rest and breathe before going again.
Thank you for watching this chapter of The Legend of Zelda Dance With Me. We hope you enjoyed. If you want to keep up with the series, make sure to hit that bell and subscribe. If you want to see the episodes early, check out the Patreon link in the description below. You can also find a link to Delia Medellini's AO3 down there also, for those interested in reading the full story. We hope to see you in the next chapter. Take care.
That kind of looks like the princess. That kind of looks like the princess.
That's what I'm saying.
That kind of looks like the princess.
That's what we're saying.
Siri, show me Link's balls.
Whoa!